Hi, my name is Divya Gunnam, and welcome to this lecture on gender perspectives and spatial strategies to tackle gender discrimination in the urban environment. I am going to talk to you about a concept I investigated, the Loiter City. Loiter City aims at developing spatial strategies to redefine a woman's place in the public realm. In this lecture, we look at realm rather than space to highlight that the issue at hand is quite complex and goes beyond the spatial aspect. The issue of gender disparity is a global one. However, the project addresses it through an Indian perspective. India has been traditionally a patriarchal society, and the research takes place in the South Indian city of Bangalore. The city recently underwent a technological boom, creating a cultural shift for women. Women have had historically well defined roles in the private realm of the home and an ambiguous relationship with the public sphere. There is a unique sense of ownership that men have over the public realm, both spatially and towards decision making. And even with the recent cultural shift, where more women are stepping out of their homes for education and employment, the city is not readily inclusive or accommodative of women's needs. For example, men's patterns are straightforward and they travel more. Women travel significantly less, but their one trip involves covering multiple destinations. They are almost always accompanied by elderly and the kids. And the public realm fails to address their vulnerabilities, caregiver needs, creating disparity and unjust conditions. In addition to this, most Indian women, irrespective of their social, economic, and religious backgrounds, have learned to accept the sad reality that they might get harassed, molested, or in extreme cases, abducted and raped in public spaces. In a patriarchal society like India, women's freedom is curtailed to an extent because their behavior is tied to the honor of the family. Their freedom is severely restricted due to actual threats as well as the perception of fear. And rooted again in the doctrine that women and men have to have different rights for their own well being, it essentially means that it's women who would have to give up their rights. This normalization of disparity and segregation forces us to examine the problem of violence from the frame of socio-spatial justice, rights and its violations, rather than addressing it as a purely safety issue. From the view of socio-spatial justice, the project aims to achieve legitimacy for women by illustrating inclusive gender policies in urban design and planning. To achieve true justice and legitimacy, women should have the unconditional right to participate, appropriate, belong, and co create cities. Aligning to these principles, we examine three aspects: the physical or spatial aspect, the societal, and the governance dimensions. After comparing multiple areas through the lens of gender experiences in Bangalore, a spectrum of areas and problems were identified. Most importantly, last mile connections were weak, putting women in vulnerable positions. Last mile connections, walkability, and waiting areas at public transport locations are not suitable for women. Even in well developed localities, there are subtle forms of gender discrimination. In addition, there is a constant confirmation that areas like playgrounds and recreational spaces are male spaces, and one shouldn't overlook the impact of non spatial cues and behavioral aspects. And this prejudice needed an institutional change at political, spatial planning, and policy levels, and also changing mindsets of people is just as important. Gender mainstreaming is adopted as the main strategy to facilitate institutional change that would tackle the systemic socio-cultural and political resistances. To mainstream gender, there should be an institutional strategy that require fundamental structural changes to the existing departments from a gender perspective, as well as operational strategies like policy and planning changes. An important institutional strategy is the introduction of my concept for a self sustaining body called the Gender Lab. This lab works at different scales, engaging social welfare and planning ministries, specialists from different backgrounds who would identify the areas that require intervention, collaborate with local women to come up with pilot projects. And these projects are then amplified to other areas. Operational strategies include policies, programs, guidelines, as well as spatial actions. They involve setting a gender agenda that aims at capacity building and skill development for women at the grassroots levels. Spatial strategies are also formulated and applied across various scales for safety and walkability. The low income neighborhood of Bellandur ignores women's access to basic amenities and infrastructure. New pedestrian accesses are proposed to the existing network for better connectivity. Buildings along the pedestrian axis outside should have mixed use functions that also cater to women's needs. The bus stop is quite far from the low income neighborhoods and the autos are very expensive. To develop integrated transport to increase women's accessibility, a share auto system is proposed with fixed pickup points that cater to economically disadvantaged groups. Culturally acceptable public spaces for women like temples and schools are transformed into hotspots that cater to their recreational and educational needs. These areas will be used for creating workshops, gender sensitization programs, or skill development programs with the help of CSR initiatives by the nearby IT companies and knowledge partners like the local NGOs. Finally, the local communities are encouraged to conduct bi-weekly engagement events led by women in existing vacant lands and abandoned lots for activities like guerrilla urbanism. The vulnerable edges will be upgraded by providing vendor zones and areas for community organizations. By implementing strategies at the neighborhood scale, a walkable and interactive last mile connection could be imagined. This picture shows the current conditions of the street where the whole road is occupied by vehicles, most of the functions are catered towards men, and there is no pedestrian infrastructure. After the strategies, the main road is split up to create more space for pedestrians. There are demarcated lanes for vendor activities and loitering. There are walkways for the continuous movement of women that is not obstructed by any loitering activity. New functions should be designed to serve women's needs. It helps achieving a balance in the gendered activity. Safe crosswalks and signages help women navigate through these streets better. To address the operability of the Gender Lab, the project uses the web of institutionalization developed by Karen Levy. It is contextualized to evaluate the capacities and shortcomings of existing Indian institutions. The web has 4 spheres of action, and the Gender Lab is the central element that maintains the web. The web starts with the citizen sphere, creating a ripple by demanding change. These demands and pressures are met by the policy sphere through creating suitable policy and planning interventions. To incorporate these interventions, fundamental structural changes will be carried out in the organizational sphere, like allocating resources and responsibilities for gender mainstreaming. Finally, the delivery sphere implements strategies with the oversight of Gender Lab and collaboration with the citizen sphere, especially women. For a radical idea like gender mainstreaming, opposing interests need to be tackled at different stages. This chart maps out the various stakeholders and optimizes their knowledge and operability through the web. My idea of Gender Lab combines the expertise of urban development and the social welfare stakeholders by becoming an important part of commonality. The collaboration of formal government institutions and informal grassroots institutions is very prudent to sustain change. Gender Lab works as a self-sustaining body of stakeholder cooperation and collaboration in a constant dialogue with the local women who are the main drivers of change. This helps in developing positive relations between the women and the built environment, and also imagining women in places of power and decision making to facilitate real change. Through this, we see how a gender inclusive city affects women from various backgrounds. Thank you for watching.